friends, family, confidants, people all over the world, because this podcast is in 60 plus countries. We are so grateful and so glad to be back with you today on yet again another episode of the Hindsight podcast. And I'm Kevin Hines, your host, and I'm here today with the incredible, one and the only, Adriana Greenup. Adriana, it's so great to have you. Thank you for joining the podcast. Really, really glad to have you here. How are you today?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I mean, it's really just super incredible to meet you because I've heard your story, like so many people have. And so I just feel super honored and privileged to be here and speak with you today. I'm so excited.
Well, the gift is all mine. So let's get right into
Absolutely.
it. Adriana grew up in a close-knit family, including her twin brother, with whom she shares a very deep bond. Born in Los Angeles, California, she spent her early childhood in Costa Rica before moving back to Pasadena, California. She is currently pursuing a double major in finance and management at Tulane University. Adriana's life took a profound turn when her father suddenly passed away after a battle with cancer. This loss led Adriana to a journey of self-recovery and reflection, particularly during the time studying abroad in Sydney, Australia. While in Sydney, she volunteered at our Big Kitchen, using her grief as a catalyst to positive change by helping others. Her personal journey through grief, coupled with her experience abroad, inspired Adriana to be selected to give a TEDx Tulane talk where she explored the complexities of happiness through the lens of her own lived experience. Adriana's speech, rich with personal anecdotes and philosophical insights, aimed to inspire others by addressing themes of community, balance, and perspective to address the complex meaning that is happiness. Adriana, it is a gift to have you on the show. We're so glad to have you here. Let's get right to the first question I have for you, which is I'd love for you to share with my audience, your upbringing, especially your time in Costa Rica, and then how it influenced your approach to life and your entrepreneurial journey.
Yes. So again, like you stated, I was born in Los Angeles before moving to Costa Rica around 3 years old. I spent about a lot of formative years there for about 6 years until I was about 9 years old before I moved back to Los Angeles County, specifically Pasadena, as you'd mentioned. Yeah. And so my time there, it really did shape me a lot. I like to think that it made me a lot more worldly because my experience growing up was a lot different, right? So it wasn't as necessarily racial in Costa Rica as my experience has been in the United States. So I'm mixed. I'm Black and I'm also Mexican and Hispanic. And when I was being raised in Costa Rica, it's really interesting because I didn't really have the stereotypical or that stereotypical Black experience. And so I think it was really interesting kind of just being really just seen as a young girl there. And so I think that shaped my perspective in the way that I've kind of grown and into myself and kind of knowing who I am first before kind of the racial more so experience I've had here in the States. And so it's really helped me kind of be true to myself and continue to stay true to myself and really focus on family values, community values, because a lot of that is what made Costa Rica so special and what's been so ingrained in me. And so it's really been interesting to kind of take that with me, especially then I went to university and I studied abroad and taking myself, my dad used to always tell me, you take yourself with you no matter where you are. So as long as you kind of keep and hold true to your own values, that's really what's going to propel you. And so that's what has shaped a lot of who I am.
Wow, I really love that perspective because as a person who's also part Black, living in America and being, very much a subject of critical racism and bigotry and hatred in my early formative years in grade school, I can really respect and appreciate the difference in experiences that we had, at least in the growing up portion, that those first few years.
Absolutely.
Fascinating to hear your kind of side of things. Really, really interesting.
Yeah.
I wanna get more into what you went through with your father's cancer battle, and of course his eventual passing. How did that affect your perspective on existence, and how has it influenced your professional and personal goals in life today?
Yes. So I'd like to kind of give a little background and kind of just more so his diagnosis and my process with that. So my father first told me about his lung cancer diagnosis when I was a freshman in college, kind of approaching the second semester of my first year. And so what had happened is he had actually received his diagnosis before I went to college. However, he did not tell my twin brother and I because he really wanted us to go out and not be distracted and kind of not really be thinking about what he's going through. But what had happened is I arrived at Tulane University, and then Hurricane Ida happened in New Orleans. And so it actually caused us to go home after being in school for 3 weeks. However, I also had caught COVID during that time. And so when they sent all of the kids back home, I actually couldn't stay at home because, under my understanding, my father just had asthma procedure. I was not to stay home because I was just getting over COVID and he was really susceptible. And so I stayed home for like a little bit before going back to Tulane. And it wasn't until that break between first semester and second semester that when we came home, he told us, he sat my brother and I down. He said, hey, I actually have lung cancer, and what had happened previously was a lung lobectomy, and I'm going through chemotherapy right now. And I was like, whoa, this is a lot. And at first, at the time, and this is kind of going to back to answer your question, is that at the time, up until that moment, I thought the worst thing that could ever happen to me was getting bad grades. That was always my mindset. However, after I then spent that winter break, before going to my second semester, I'd witnessed the pain he was going through, and that he was battling through chemotherapy. And I realized, oh, this is actually one of the worst things that you can really go through, is seeing also, somebody who you love and respect and value so much, going through something that's so hard. And so initially, when I'd gone back for my second semester, it had altered my perspective a lot. I started to focus on my relationships with others. I started to really focus on really maintaining the connection and the relationships that I had with other people as my number one priority. And so as a result, the adverse effect, unfortunately, was that my grades started to kind of go down a little bit. And so then he started to heal and he started to get better. And then I continued to maintain the relationships I had in my life. And then suddenly, after he'd gone through his chemotherapy, it was to our knowledge that the cancer was gone. However, what had happened is I'd applied to study abroad in Sydney, Australia, and about, I want to say, 2 months before I was supposed to leave, he had gotten a diagnosis that his cancer had unfortunately come back, even though it had been gone for about 6 months at this point. And then he didn't tell his kids again because my brother and I were to study abroad, and he didn't want to get in the way of our life again. And so he hadn't told us, but unfortunately what had happened about 6 weeks before I was to study abroad, he fell really ill. We still aren't entirely sure. It could have been the flu that had kind of just really taken a toll. And unfortunately, he lost his life very suddenly. And then after those 6 weeks of grieving at home, I embarked on this journey where I didn't know anybody. And it wasn't like Europe where a lot of people, a lot of your friends and family are there, right? Like I was going to some place where I didn't know anyone. And so it really forced me to be in this position to still go out and live my life like I know that he would have wanted me to. And that was a main priority for me. And so, through losing him, of course, grief is so complex, and it's so, it just feels like you can't go on. You're finally at that point where you're like, wow, like nothing can feel worse than what I'm feeling right now. But every day I decided to get up and keep going. And my mindset shifted initially, especially when I'd gotten to Australia, I was thinking it's so easy to stay in my room and not do anything. It's so easy to lay in a ball and only cry. And I think that that's okay sometimes. But for me, I knew what I wanted was to go out and create memories. I believe that I truly deserve to have fun experiences, because grief and happiness and happy moments can still coincide and coexist. And so I was like, you know what, like need to either go out and choose things that are going to make me happy, but I have to get out and go do it. And so that's really where my perspective shifted. And I talk a lot as well in my talk about irony, because what I didn't expect to find through my grief process was about how to be happy. And it's found through your community, it's found through a balance, and it's found through a change in perspective. And instead of viewing happiness as more so an end goal, I view it more so as like having happy moments, and all those moments make up what my experience was. So yeah.
Wow. It's truly incredible to think about all the things you went through with your grief and the things maybe you're still going through,
Right.
because grief doesn't just end a year, 2, 3, 4, 7 years after the person you love so dearly disappears.
Right.
My wife, Margaret, her mom also died of lung cancer, and it was brutal, and she died in our arms. And I will never forget that moment so long as I shall live. But of course, my wife, that was her best friend in the whole world. That was the person she loved most dear and held most dear in her life, and the person that gave her the most value, hope, and healing in her existence. And it broke her heart to think about losing her mom in the 9 months that, it was different than what you experienced. She knew her mom was passing away. She was doing everything in her power to help her mom get treatment. And when Jean passed away, Margaret's world was shattered. So I really respect, what you went through. And I want to tell you, grief is no linear path. It's something we have to deal with for really the rest of our lives. If you love someone unconditionally, you're going to grieve them unconditionally. And the greater the pain, the greater the love you had, the greater the pain you experience.
Exactly.
For that person. You mentioned, go ahead, please.
Oh, I was going to actually kind of continue what you were saying about that was one of the major things that I learned, is that the depth of my grief is really only as deep as my love for him, which, because happiness and sadness are two different sides of the same coin. You can't really feel, happy without kind of the inevitable balance of still being able to feel sad about something. And, I really learned this from my father, like, as sad as I was, it's only because of all the happiness he once brought me while he was here. And again, this can be so applicable to pretty much anything in your life, whether it's, going through a breakup because you loved someone so deeply. And when you go through a breakup, that's why you miss the person, is because they once brought you so many fulfilling feelings. Same as losing a job or a divorce or missing a job opportunity, all the good it could have brought you, and then having to grieve that. And so I really like what you were saying, and I could not agree more.
That's a really good point you made, that everyone needs to comprehend and understand, that some people don't yet, is that grief and trauma don't just come from losing someone or losing a pet or losing a life. They can be in any aspect of our lives where something is different or changed or shifted from what it was. And I think a lot of people don't really capture that in their hearts, is that, yes, if your whole identity is in the job you do and you lose that job, then you become lost and you're grieving that loss. And it can be immense. And I think people around the world, certainly, let's talk about Australia. There was, and there sometimes still is, a macho grandstanding that goes on in Australia. And I know this from a person who made a film about 6 people that live there. And there's a man up kind of, if you will, certainly for men in Australia, to not feel, to not emote, to not grieve, and we've really got to, and that can go around the world. But we've got to shift that across the country, across the globe, and help people that are watching this podcast, listening to this podcast, know that whatever you're grieving, accept the grief, live the grief, and let it be, so you can find a way to move forward in the face of your immeasurable pain, because it is possible. On that note of Australia, Adriana, during your time studying abroad in Sydney, you volunteered at Our Big Kitchen. Tell us first, what is Our Big Kitchen, and how did this experience impact your view on community and service in the world?
Right. So what Our Big Kitchen is they are a nonprofit organization in Bondi, Australia, which is basically around inner Sydney. And so what they really do is they inspire people to really come in and help prepare and make and distribute thousands of meals to thousands of people in Sydney. And the first time that I actually went, it was perfect timing, because some girl had actually spent her 18th birthday party there, where she and all of her friends came in and they helped make a lot of food for people in Sydney, which was super cool. And then I spoke to all those girls there, and because a lot of the organization, they had heard my story, and they were like, hey, we really want to get you in and speak to these young women because they're making such a change, and so are you. And so I went in and I kind of shared my story, spoke to them, and by the end of it, we were all in tears, and it was a great way to kind of just inspire a lot of young people. I'm young myself, and so it was really cool. And so yeah, as well as the next few times that I went, there was a girl there. She was slightly older than me, about 24, and I was 20 at the time. And when we were speaking, she was telling me that she was battling a drug addiction because she'd lost her mother. I mean, that was really the only person in her life who she really, really looked up to. And so that loss came at a complete shock. It completely turned her world upside down. And we had a lot of conversations, and I was able to provide short and a mentorship for her, which was also really fulfilling for myself. So I was just happy that I got to kind of share my message and help her in any kind of capacity that I could.
Well, you're doing incredible work. You've done phenomenal work. You've obviously changed a lot of lives. I would like to ask you, what are some of the biggest mental health challenges you faced after your father's passing in particular? And how did you navigate those struggles while balancing your academic and personal life?
Some of the biggest mental health challenges I struggled with was really just was missing him, which seems kind of self-explanatory, but it's to a degree that I've never felt before. It was such a foreign feeling. It's like a pit in your stomach that you just can't feel, and it's like you can't move, you can't really do anything. And so that was definitely the biggest feeling to overcome. And like what you were saying about grief, it's not linear. And so, sometimes you could be walking and then it hits you, or you smell a certain smell, or you think about something that kind of reminds you of him again. And it kind of just sends you back down spiraling. And so I think the first thing that I found that really helped me was community. It was finding people who would listen. And at that time, especially as really early in my grief when I'd left, I met new people who didn't know me and who didn't know my relationship with my father, right? And so I didn't have people who were kind of trying to explain what my relationship with him was to me, and telling me what he would have wanted in X, Y, and Z. And I think at times that's absolutely helpful, especially the people who were close to my father, because he cared about building those intimate relationships, and so a lot of people knew him very well, and so they knew what he would have wanted his kids to do, and at times that was very helpful. But I think really early in my grief, what I needed was somebody to just listen, who didn't know my relationship with my dad, who could just bend an ear and listen. And so I would say the first thing that kind of helped me, especially when I would have those grief spirals, would just be to connect with my friends and people who would really just listen to me and hear me cry. And oftentimes I didn't cry in front of others because it wasn't something I was really comfortable with. But at those rare moments where I did cry in front of other people, I was met with a lot of grace and empathy and understanding. And that was huge for me, because it transcends, right? And so I'm missing my father because I had so much love for him. But even in my moments of grief, I could look and see the people who were listening to me and how much they love me. And that fulfilled me. And that felt good to me. Was kind of recognizing, even though, you're low, that's when you see who's there for you. And I was fortunate enough to be
Yeah.
surrounded by a lot of beautiful people. And so that was definitely one thing.
I think expressing what you just did is pivotal. When you lose someone you love so deeply and the pain and the grief is so deep, you don't always need someone to give you answers to your pain.
Correct.
You don't always need someone to give you advice for how to overcome. Sometimes you just need someone to listen, to understand, not to respond, to physically, emotionally, and mentally just be there for you
Mhm.
in the moments you're going through without trying to solve said problem.
Exactly.
I think a lot of people could, yeah, I think a lot of people could grow and learn from that. And I have to be honest, Adriana, when I was in grade school, I was a horrible listener, and even kindergarten, I failed kindergarten. I went to kindergarten twice. I was a year behind because I could not take in the information to process it and then give an answer for a problem. And that would follow me until recently, when I realized how important it is to listen, to understand, not to respond. To the people around you don't always need your advice. And that includes the people closest to me. And being a better listener is something you can glean over a lifetime. And just because you're bad at it at one point in your life doesn't mean you can't be great at it later on. But once you find the ability to be great at listening, to understand, not to respond, you're actually giving so much back to the people around you.
Absolutely.
Uh,
Absolutely.
yeah, Adriana, I want to talk about this TEDx Tulane talk you did, and it's my understanding that this talk delved into the complexities of happiness through the lens of grief. How has your understanding of happiness evolved through your experiences, and how do you apply this understanding to your daily life and work?
Yeah, I mean, well, we did touch upon quite a few things that I really did speak in my talk. One of the main, things being about kind of like that delicate balance between, like the depth of my grief is only as deep as my love for him. But I think one of the main things as well is that learning that happiness, from my perspective, is temporary. And this is what I'd expand on as well, is that I've heard people say, oh, I want to get happy. I want someday want to get happy. But I would more so refer to that as like eudaimonia, or like what Greek philosophers call eudaimonia, which is like kind of reaching like a state of fulfillment instead. Because happiness is really just like any other emotion, like sadness, frustration, anger, embarrassment. All of these things are kind of like temporary feelings. And for me, shifting my perspective and viewing happiness as like, something that can come and go and that ebbs and flows, has helped me reach a more fulfilling life. So I think, especially, after losing my dad, when, those moments were sometimes harder to come by, that when I did, I really appreciated it. When I would laugh a lot, I would really appreciate that. And so, yeah, definitely is that the fact that it's more like a temporary feeling.
That's a really great point, is that, you don't, happiness and sadness come with each other just like light and dark.
Right.
You can't have the light unless you come out of the dark.
Exactly.
Right? And I think that to be fulfilled in life and to find a capacity for joy in life is much more important than being happy for the rest of your life.
Exactly.
How do you how do you expand your capacity for joy amongst all the things that could be painful or hurtful in this existence, while finding ways to live a fulfilling existence, so you're not just taking, but you're giving back to the world every day? And when you give back like you're doing every day, Adriana, you're feeling fulfilled. And that's the whole point of giving back, and how much it balances the ego and the mind and all that matters.
And also, I think a big part of the human experience that I've learned is to feel, if that makes sense. Right after I lost my dad, I remember I called my mom, again, from Sydney. I was about a month in, I think, at this point. And I remember I was very upset. And I was really upset because I couldn't really get sad about anything. Nothing really made me sad. I didn't really care much about things. I was just like, I couldn't feel that capacity to cry about anything that wasn't my dad. And I remember I explained this to my mom, and the reason I was so frustrated was because it's such a privilege to feel, because nothing ever made me sad enough to the point where I would cry. And again, not that you need to cry to be sad. And again, everybody processes emotions differently. But up until the point where, before I lost my dad, I used to be able to cry about any and everything. That's just who I was. I'm not saying that in order to feel you need to cry, but for Adriana, for myself, that's, what that had meant to me, was that, I felt so passionately about things that I could just cry, whether it was a song or a movie or anything. And I remember I called my mom. I was so upset because I was like, I can't cry. Like, I can't cry about anything, really. That's not Papa. Like, I can't. And I remember her telling me, like, it'll come back, when it can. And I was so upset because I was like, I'm so young right now. And my dad used to say that when you're so young, your fire burns so hot and so bright. And I was so upset because I felt like that was taken from me at the time. Because I was like, wow, like, I want to care. Like, I want to be heartbroken and feel like, oh my God, like, I'm so heartbroken over this person, or I'm so X, Y, and Z. And, I wanted to feel like I could feel sad about things again. Because again, that's what, especially when you're young, everything feels like, oh, the end of the world, or X, Y, and Z. And that's just a part of being young and feeling things to the, full capacity. And at that point, I'd lost that. And then I remember I started, I met somebody wonderful. I started falling in love, and I started to get those feelings back. And with time, now I can cry over like little things. And I remember the first time I ever cried about something that wasn't my dad, I was also really happy. And I remember telling my friends, I was like, wow, like I'm crying. Like, oh my goodness, I'm crying over something that's not my dad. Like, it was such a huge milestone for me, because I'm like, I can feel this intensely again. And over time, it started coming back. And now I embrace both happy and sad moments, because being able to feel again like that is such a privilege. It's such a privilege.
Wow. You are a plethora of wisdom, Adriana, and it's really incredible to hear and see. I think that our audience is going to get a great deal out of this episode, and more importantly, a great deal from you and your words of true wisdom and insight, which is just wonderful to hear.
Thank you.
I haven't ever talked about this. Well, I certainly haven't talked this in a very long time, but I had a year longer in my mental health battle years ago, right before I leapt off the Golden Gate Bridge, where I didn't cry for probably that entire year. I became numb. And I'd love to hear your thoughts about feeling that numbness and what it can do to you, and go into a little bit more deeply about how you came out of it.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for the question. I think at the time, at first when I lost my dad, it was very, very devastating. And then I got, and then I flew out and I met some people, and I could laugh. That was always, I could still laugh. And I could have happy moments. But what always got me again was I couldn't have really sad ones. Because again, you have to have some capacity of caring to feel sad. You have to, and so I think just the numbness there was that, because I'd gone through something so tragic, everything else was so much like my my caliber for what, like my threshold. I was already past that threshold. So I definitely felt a lot of numbness at the time. And so I guess, what helped me to come out of that was I would start to think of the world a little bit differently. I went on a walk with my friend one time, and we walked all around campus, and I started observing things. I was like, oh, wow, like it's really green here. He was like, yeah, I guess it is. And I was like, no, like it's beautiful. Like the grass is really green. Like that tree is really tall. Like that's so cool. And he was like, yeah. And I was making kind of like obvious observations, but there's so much beauty in the obvious. Sometimes you just need to squint. Sometimes it's right in your face and you just need to acknowledge it. And so that change in perspective helped me a lot to come out of this, was realizing the beauty in life, realizing the beauty in the small things, even the obvious things. And it's like you walk across campus, you always see the same big beautiful tree, right? And then let's say you walk and then that big beautiful tree's gone. You're gonna notice that's gone, right? But why'd you have to notice that it was gone to notice its beauty first? You know what I'm saying? And so I think kind of changing my perspective and trying to recognize all the beauty in life and things like that, it definitely helped me come back around after I lost my dad. So
You know, every morning I wake up, after my meditation, after my exercise, I walk out into my front yard. I take my shoes off. I put my feet to the ground. I let the ions radiate through me. And I look at the beautiful trees surrounding my home, and I appreciate that beauty. Not only do I appreciate it, but when you put your feet, your unsocked feet to Mother Earth, there's a kinetic experience you have if you spend at least 19 minutes doing it. And not many people know that. There's ions flowing through your body. We human beings are magnetized, and when we put our feet to the ground to Mother Earth, there's an experience shared. There's a bond there. That's why indigenous cultures feel so connected to Mother Earth. That's why it's so important to them. And I think a lot of people in today's society either don't know that at all or have completely lost touch with that reality. And you just simply reminded me of it. So I want to say thank
of
you.
course, yeah.
Adriana, yeah, no, that was really special. Adriana, you talked briefly about being a mentor to young women, and what is the significance of mentorship in your life?
The significance of mentorship in my life is giving back. Again, it kind of goes full circle to what I was saying about like love transcending. I think love is energy, and I don't think it's ever gone. And so, my dad was a person who inspired others. He was, it showed through every, facet of his life. And during the funeral, we had it at St. Andrew's Catholic Church in Pasadena, California, and he packed it. Absolutely. The priest looked out. He was like, this alone is testament to the kind of man he was. How many people, you know, and whether that's one person or 20 people or however many people, hundreds of people that you have there, the fact that you can even have an influence on one person is huge. And so, again, my father was definitely a very, very influential person. He had a very strong voice. And I like to think, that I took some of that and, even though he's not physically here anymore, I like to continue that love, and I like to inspire other people and help other people. And so, and I know what it feels like to need support. I know what it feels like to want to be heard, to need to be heard. And I love giving it to other people. I love giving back.
Incredible. Well, I have to ask you at this point, you've given back to people so often and so much. How do you give back to yourself? What are the tools and techniques you utilize to maintain your mental well-being on a daily basis?
But sometimes choosing the things that are going to make me happy. And again, I spoke about this in my talk a little bit, but even if it's something like, let's say it's harder to start a day, even choosing to put on an outfit that I'm like, I think I look good in this. I like the way that I look in this. I'm going to put on, I'm going to feel myself a little bit. I'm going to look in the mirror. I'm going to feel good. I'm going to put on a cheesy song. I'm going to put on whatever kind of music I need to get ready and to start my day and do the things that make me happy. I have to sometimes, especially through my grief, I sometimes have to choose that. And again, I like to look at it the perspective of, all of these moments are what make up my experience. And so, yeah, I think, and, at first it was definitely like, I need to get through today. I'm not going to worry about the next 30 years. I'm not going to worry about the next 10 years. I'm not going to worry about the next week. Like, I just need to get through today. And at first, it's, what it looked like. And then you look up
Yeah.
and it's been 2 days and 3 weeks and 5 months, a year, and now I'm at the point where I'm no longer kind of surviving to get through the next day. I'm living and I'm embracing that. And I think that definitely along the way that's helped me, and especially still now is, choosing to do the things that are going to make me happy, choosing to be around the right people, and calling and checking in with family. And yeah, those are definitely the things I do to take care of myself.
That's so great to hear you say that there are choices. There are choices we can make
Hmm.
to delineate good from bad, hope from despair, dark from light, and how we can achieve the light and the hope and the beauty in life by making different choices and making potentially the right choices for each of us, right? Everybody's body and brain is different. Not one size fits all for your mental wellness. So if I do 10 things that help me thrive, those 10 things might not work for you or somebody else. But if we combine all the things that are science backed, evidence informed, proven techniques to better brain, mind, behavioral, mental, physical, spiritual health and well being, and we do as many as we can, some of those are going to hit and they're going to make you feel better on the inside and make you better balance and make you and help you achieve more in life and help you make better choices. So it's really important that you said that. I want to go and kind of wrap this up here. I'd love a couple things to hear what you would say, Adriana, if you're looking right in the camera, and say this to the person, young girl, in fact, who's struggling with grief or mental and brain health challenges or all of the above. What would you say to that person to help them to keep on going, to keep fighting, and to be here tomorrow?
To feel, let yourself feel what you're feeling, and don't invalidate yourself in that process. Let yourself feel sad if you're feeling sad. And that's not to say don't take actions to come out of it, because I want to be very clear. But also give yourself the space to feel and validate yourself there. You can still make choices, choices that work for you, and to reach out to people who you trust and who you love. And know that whatever reasons you're feeling those feelings for, they're valid and they're enough.
And you are
Right,
enough.
and you are enough. Absolutely. And so I think for me at least, sometimes it was, I went through moments where I'd invalidate my own feelings and, oh, you're just stretching in, blah, blah, blah. Or no, but if you're feeling sad, you're feeling sad, and recognize that. Give yourself the space to feel sad, but at the same time, get through today. Get through today. Do the things that, filling you, whether that's helping other people or, again, listening to a really cheesy song, but connect with Mother Earth, right?
Yeah.
Know that you are enough and that there are people who care.
Adriana Greenup, thank you so much for coming on the Hindsight podcast, for sharing with us your story, for being vulnerable, for telling your truth, and for reaching people of all walks of life, helping them change their perspective, change their perception, and be here tomorrow. We're grateful for the time we spent with you. Couldn't be more appreciative of it. Wishing you all the best in all of your wonderful endeavors. Keep changing lives. Ladies and gentlemen, this was yet again another episode of the Hindsights podcast, found wherever podcasts can be found every Thursday. Wishing you all the wellness in the world. Take care of each other and take care of yourselves. See ya.